Picture this: a young man barely 24, standing on the windswept coast of southern France, his eyes fixed on the horizon. It's 1605, and the sea is both a promise and a peril. His name is Vincent de Paul, a humble priest with dreams of serving God and escaping the poverty of his youth. But in a single brutal moment, his life is torn apart. Kidnapped by ruthless Barbary pirates, he's chained, beaten, and sold into slavery in a foreign land. This isn't just the story of a saint, it's a true crime saga of abduction, survival, and a redemption that would change the world. Welcome to another chilling episode on our True Crime channel, where we uncover the untold stories of figures whose lives were shaped by darkness yet emerged as beacons of hope. Today we dive into the remarkable journey of Saint Vincent de Paul, a man whose name is synonymous with charity, but whose early years were marked by suffering and captivity. From the slave markets of Tunis to the slums of Paris, Vincent's life is a testament to resilience, faith, and an unyielding commitment to the marginalized. How did a man who endured such horrors become one of history's greatest champions of the poor? What drove him to transform not just lives but entire systems of care? Let's unravel this gripping tale of survival and salvation. Vincent de Paul was born in 1581 in Pouy, a small village in Gascony, France. The third of 6 children in a peasant family, he grew up tending sheep and working the fields, his hands calloused from labor. His parents, Jean and Bertrand, were devout Catholics, instilling in Vincent a deep faith despite their poverty. As a boy, he showed a keen intellect, catching the eye of a local priest who tutored him. By 14, Vincent was sent to a Franciscan school in Dax, a rare opportunity for a peasant's son. His family scraped together funds, hoping education would lift him from hardship. At 19, Vincent was ordained a priest, one of the youngest in France at the time. But his early priesthood was driven more by ambition than altruism. He sought a comfortable benefice, a church position with a steady income, to support his family and escape the drudgery of rural life. In 1605, he traveled to Marseille to settle an inheritance, a small sum that promised financial security. It was a routine journey, one he'd made before. But fate had other plans. As he sailed along the Mediterranean coast, his ship was ambushed by Barbary pirates, notorious raiders who terrorized European waters, kidnapping Christians to sell in North African slave markets. Bound in chains, Vincent was torn from everything he knew. His dreams of a quiet life shattered as he was dragged to Tunis, a bustling hub of the Ottoman slave trade. What followed was 2 years of unimaginable hardship, servitude, suffering, and a test of faith that would forge a saint. As we step into Vincent's world, we'll uncover how this true crime ordeal became the crucible for a man who would redefine charity and challenge a society blind to the cries of the poor. The year is 1605, and Vincent de Paul, a young priest with dreams of a better life, finds himself in a nightmare. Dragged from a French ship by Barbary pirates, he's bound in heavy chains, his wrists raw from iron. The Mediterranean, once a symbol of opportunity, becomes his prison as he's rowed to Tunis, a sprawling North African city under Ottoman rule. Here, in the chaotic slave markets, Vincent is stripped of his identity, his freedom, and nearly his hope. This is no mere historical footnote. It's a true crime story of abduction and survival that would shape a saint. Tunis in the early 17th century was a hub of commerce and cruelty. The slave trade thrived, fueled by pirates who kidnapped Europeans to sell to wealthy Muslims, Christians, and renegades, former Christians who converted to Islam for privilege. Vincent, just 24, was paraded through the market, his fate decided by the highest bidder. His first master was a fisherman, a gruff man who forced Vincent to haul nets and mend boats under the blistering sun. The work was grueling, and Vincent, unused to such labor, struggled to keep pace. Beatings were common, and food was scarce. Dates, bread, and water were his sustenance. After months, Vincent was sold again, this time to an alchemist, a peculiar figure obsessed with turning base metals into gold. In a cluttered workshop filled with bubbling potions and strange instruments, Vincent served as a laborer, stoking fires and grinding herbs. The alchemist, though kinder than the fisherman, was erratic, and Vincent's life remained one of servitude. Yet, through these hardships, his faith held firm. He prayed in secret, clutching a small crucifix hidden in his rags, whispering psalms to sustain his spirit. Vincent's final master was a renegade, a former Catholic priest from Savoy who had converted to Islam to escape slavery. This man, now wealthy with a large estate, took a liking to Vincent's intelligence and resilience. Vincent worked in the fields, tending crops alongside other slaves, but he also shared his faith, speaking of God's mercy even in captivity. His master's wife, a Muslim woman, was intrigued by Vincent's prayers and songs, often asking him to explain his beliefs. Over time, Vincent's unwavering faith stirred something in his master. The renegade began to question his choices, haunted by the religion he'd abandoned. In 1607, after 2 years of enslavement, a turning point came. Moved by Vincent's example, the renegade proposed a daring by name equals plan escape, daring plan. They would flee Tunis together, risking death to return to France. Under cover of night, they stole a small boat and rowed across the Mediterranean, a perilous journey fraught with storms and the threat of recapture. Miraculously, they reached Aigues-Mortes, a French port, in June 1607. Vincent was free, but the scars of slavery, physical and emotional, would never fully fade. This true crime ordeal, a tale of abduction and escape, set the stage for a life dedicated to those society forgot. As we follow Vincent's return to France, we'll see how his suffering became the foundation for a mission that would transform countless lives. In June 1607, Vincent de Paul stepped onto French soil, a free man but forever changed. The young priest who had left for Marseille 2 years earlier was gone, replaced by a man who had seen the depths of human suffering. His body bore the marks of chains, his spirit the weight of captivity. Yet, Vincent's faith, tested in the crucible of slavery, emerged stronger, guiding him toward a new calling. This chapter of his life is not just about survival, it's about transformation, a redemption story that begins with a priest reborn, ready to serve those society deemed invisible. Back in France, Vincent faced a world that mirrored his own hardships. The early 17th century was a time of turmoil. The wars of religion had left scars, and the gap between rich and poor was a chasm. Nobles and clergy lived in splendor, while peasants starved, and urban slums overflowed with the destitute. Vincent, now in his late 20s, could have sought a comfortable church position, as he once planned. Instead, his enslavement had awakened a fire within him, a resolve to fight the injustices he'd endured and witnessed. He settled in Paris, a city of contrasts, where grand palaces stood blocks from squalid alleys. Initially, Vincent served as a tutor to the wealthy Gondi family, a role that provided stability but exposed him to the hypocrisy of the elite. The Gondis were pious, yet their estates relied on the labor of impoverished peasants, many of whom lived in conditions not unlike slavery. Vincent began visiting these workers, hearing their stories of hunger, illness, and despair. Their plight echoed his own in Tunis, stirring a sense of solidarity. In 1617, a pivotal moment came in the village of Folleville, where Vincent was preaching. A dying peasant, tormented by guilt, confessed sins to Vincent that he'd hidden for years, fearing damnation. The man's relief after absolution moved Vincent deeply. He realized that the poor, often neglected by the church, lacked spiritual care as much as material aid. He began organizing missions, gathering priests to preach and offer sacraments in rural areas. This was the seed of the Congregation of the Mission, later known as the Vincentians, a religious order dedicated to serving the poor. Vincent's work expanded to Paris, where he encountered the city's underbelly, orphans, beggars, and galley slaves condemned to row warships. His time in Tunis gave him empathy for these outcasts, and he began advocating for them, challenging a society that criminalized poverty. His enslavement had taught him that dignity was not a privilege but a right, and he was determined to restore it to those who had none. As we move forward, we'll see how Vincent's mission grew, turning personal redemption into a movement that would reshape charity and justice. By the 1620s, Vincent de Paul was no longer just a priest. He was a force of change, a man driven by the memory of chains and the cries of the forgotten. In Paris, a city teeming with wealth and want, he saw opportunity where others saw despair. The true crime of his enslavement had revealed society's failures, and Vincent was determined to rewrite the story, not just for himself but for the countless souls trapped in poverty. This is the heart of his redemption, a mission to build a legacy of charity that would outlive him. In 1617, Vincent founded the Ladies of Charity, a group of wealthy women inspired by his preaching to fund aid for the poor. They collected alms, visited slums, and supported Vincent's rural missions. But he soon realized that charity needed structure to be sustainable. In 1625, he established the Congregation of the Mission, a community of priests and brothers vowed to evangelize the poor. The Vincentians, as they became known, lived simply, traveling to neglected villages to preach, teach, and offer sacraments. Their motto, Evangelizare pauperibus misit me, he sent me to preach to the poor, reflected Vincent's belief that faith and service were inseparable. Vincent's vision extended beyond spiritual care. In 1633, with Louise de Marillac, a widowed noblewoman and kindred spirit, he co-founded the Daughters of Charity, a revolutionary order of women dedicated to serving the sick and poor. Unlike cloistered nuns, the daughters lived among the people, their convent the streets, their chapel the parish church, as Vincent described. They ran hospitals, orphanages, and schools, providing practical help with a spirit of humility. Their distinctive white cornets became a symbol of hope in Paris's darkest corners. Vincent's organizations transformed lives. The Daughters of Charity cared for abandoned infants, fed the hungry, and nursed plague victims when others fled. The Vincentians reformed seminaries, training priests to serve rather than seek wealth. Vincent himself worked tirelessly, organizing relief during famines, visiting prisoners, and advocating for galley slaves, whose plight reminded him of Tunis. His ability to bridge the elite and the destitute was remarkable. He persuaded nobles to fund his work while kneeling beside beggars in prayer. Yet, Vincent faced resistance. Some clergy criticized his focus on the poor, accusing him of neglecting doctrine. Wealthy patrons balked at his calls for systemic change, preferring charity that didn't challenge their privilege. Through it all, Vincent remained steadfast, his enslavement a constant reminder of what was at stake. His mission was not just about aid but about dignity, a radical idea in a world that dehumanized the poor. As we approach the climax of his story, we'll see how Vincent's boldest acts of compassion cemented his legacy as a savior of the marginalized. By the 1640s, Vincent de Paul was a man on fire, his life a whirlwind of action and advocacy. At 60, when many slowed down, he accelerated, driven by a vision of a world where no one was discarded. The true crime of his enslavement had ignited a mission, And now, at the peak of his influence, Vincent made choices that would echo through history. This is the climax of his story, a moment when he turned personal redemption into a revolution, challenging the injustices of his time with courage and compassion. Vincent's most audacious act was his campaign to ransom Christian slaves in North Africa. His own captivity in Tunis had seared the horrors of slavery into his soul, and he could not ignore the thousands still chained. Using funds from the Ladies of Charity and royal patrons, he sent Vincentian priests to Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, negotiating with slavers to free captives. Between 1640 and 1650, they ransomed over 1,200 slaves, mostly French and Italian Christians, reuniting them with families or providing shelter in France. Vincent corresponded with these missionaries, weeping over their reports of suffering, and personally welcomed freed slaves, offering them food and clothing. In Paris, Vincent's work reached new heights. He reformed hospitals, which were often death traps for the poor, overrun with disease and neglect. With the Daughters of Charity, he introduced hygiene standards, trained nurses, and ensured patients received dignified care. He founded hospices for the elderly, schools for orphan children, and workshops to teach trades, empowering the poor to break cycles of poverty. During the Fronde, a civil war from 1648 to 1653, he organized relief for refugees, distributing food and shelter amid chaos. Vincent's actions were not just charitable, they were subversive. He challenged a society that criminalized poverty, advocating for laws to protect the destitute. He confronted corrupt officials who exploited galley slaves, demanding better conditions. His influence reached the French court, where he served as a spiritual advisor to Queen Anne of Austria, urging her to support his causes. Some accused him of overstepping, but Vincent was undeterred. His enslavement had taught him that silence was complicity, and he would not be silent. These years were Vincent's legacy in action, a life poured out for the least. He lived simply, sharing the hardships of those he served, his black robes worn and patched. His health began to fail, but his spirit burned bright, fueled by the belief that every person bore God's image. As we move to the conclusion of his story, we'll see how Vincent's work endured, a testament to a man who turned a true crime nightmare into a beacon of hope. In September 1660, Vincent de Paul lay dying in a modest room in Paris, his body frail but his spirit at peace. At 79, he had lived a life few could imagine, from a peasant boy to a slave, from a priest to a pioneer of charity. The true crime of his abduction had been a dark chapter, but Vincent had rewritten his story, turning suffering into service, despair into hope. As his breath faded, surrounded by Vincentians and Daughters of Charity, he left behind a legacy that would endure for centuries, a testament to the power of compassion in a world marred by injustice. Vincent's final years were marked by relentless service, even as his health declined. He continued to oversee his organizations, write letters to missionaries, and pray for the poor. His last act was to bless the Daughters of Charity, urging them to love the poor and honor them as you would honor Christ. On September 27, 1660, he passed away, his death mourned by thousands, from nobles to beggars, who had been touched by his work. The Church declared him a saint in 1737, canonized by Pope Clement XII, and named him the patron of charitable societies in 1885. The impact of Vincent's life is staggering. The Congregation of the Mission, with over 3,000 members today, serves in 80 countries, running schools, hospitals, and missions for the poor. The Daughters of Charity, numbering over 14,000, operate in 90 countries, caring for the sick, educating children, and advocating for the marginalized. The Saint Vincent de Paul Society, founded in 1833 by Frederick Ozanam and inspired by Vincent, has millions of volunteers worldwide, providing food, housing, and support to those in need. From Haiti to India, Vincent's vision lives on, a ripple effect of mercy that began with a man in chains. Vincent's story resonates with true crime fans because it begins with a crime, his abduction, and ends with redemption. His enslavement exposed the horrors of human trafficking, a scourge that persists today. His response was not vengeance but transformation, using his suffering to fuel a movement for justice. In the United States, where his societies serve millions, Vincent's example inspires volunteers, from food pantries in Chicago to disaster relief in Houston. His life challenges us to ask, how can we, too, turn personal trials into acts of love? How can we see the poor not as problems but as people? As we close this journey through Vincent de Paul's life, we're left with a man who defied his era's indifference. From the slave markets of Tunis to the slums of Paris, he carried a truth forged in hardship: every person deserves dignity. His legacy is not just in institutions, but in the countless lives lifted by his work. Saint Vincent de Paul, the slave who became a savior, reminds us that redemption is possible, even in the darkest of stories. Thank you for joining us on this true crime odyssey. May Vincent's courage inspire you to act with compassion, wherever you are.
Wow! What a journey through the incredible life of Saint Vincent de Paul. If you were gripped by this true crime tale of abduction, survival, and redemption, don't miss out on more stories like this. Hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon to get notified about our latest Saints true crime documentaries and inspiring historical tales. Join our community of truth seekers and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. Subscribe now.